She called the police because I was standing on my own ranch, and the deed she never read was sitting in a drawer 8 feet from where the patrol car parked. At 7:42 in the morning, dispatch logged the call as trespassing, uncooperative male, agricultural equipment. I was moving hay. Diane Reyes, the newly elected president of the Cedar Hollow Homeowners Association, stood at my gate with her phone still in her hand, certain she had just stopped a crime. She had not read the deed she was standing on. Nobody at Cedar Hollow had. Not once. Not in 11 years. That mistake was about to cost her the only thing she actually cared about, her authority. But I am getting ahead of myself. 3 weeks before that patrol car reached my gate, none of this had a name yet. I do not usually explain myself to strangers, but if you have ever had someone assume authority over land they never owned, you already know where this is going. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from, because I have a feeling more than a few of you have a version of Diane Reyes living 2 houses down. My name is Marcus Cole. I am 44 years old, and I run cattle on 800 acres in central Texas that my grandfather bought outright in 1958, 11 years before the county even drew zoning lines out here. I spent 6 years as a land surveyor before I came home to run the ranch full-time, which means paperwork does not scare me, it relaxes me. I live by 3 rules when someone tries to push me around. First, I never raise my voice, because volume is what people use when they do not have proof. Second, I write everything down the same day it happens, because memory bends and paper does not. Third, I let the other person talk as long as they want, because eventually they say something they should not have. Diane Reyes was about to break all 3 of those rules for me without meaning to, simply by talking. Cedar Hollow Estates went up 4 years ago on the parcel bordering my eastern fence line, 210 homes with a clubhouse, a stone entrance, and a homeowners association that changed presidents twice before Diane won the seat on a promise to enforce community standards. My ranch predates that subdivision by decades, and my access road, the same gravel path my grandfather graded by hand, has always run along the boundary the county recognizes as mine. Diane did not know that. On a Tuesday morning, she watched a rented trailer back down that road toward my hay barn and decided, without asking a single question, that a stranger was hauling equipment onto community property. She did not walk over. She did not knock. She called the police from her porch, describing a trespasser with agricultural machinery on Cedar Hollow land. By the time the patrol car reached my gate, I had already unloaded the trailer and was back inside checking the mail. The deputy who answered the call was a soft-spoken man named Officer Hale, and he asked the 2 questions that mattered before doing anything else. He asked who owned the road, and he asked whether Diane had any documentation showing Cedar Hollow held rights to it. She did not on her, not anywhere close. Officer Hale wrote his report, noted no violation had occurred, and drove away within 11 minutes. That should have ended it. Instead, within 48 hours, a certified letter arrived at my house on Cedar Hollow Homeowners Association letterhead, citing Section 6.2 of the Community Covenants, the rulebook every homeowner agrees to when they buy into the subdivision, which supposedly gave the association jurisdiction over shared access roads within 100 feet of the subdivision boundary. The letter demanded I submit future deliveries for board approval and warned of a $200 daily fine for non-compliance. I read the covenant section twice. Section 6.2 governs shared roads the association itself had built and recorded, not roads that predated the subdivision by half a century. Diane had not checked which category my road fell into. She had assumed the newer developments rules simply extended outward until something stopped them. Nothing had ever stopped her before, because nobody on that road had ever pushed back. I did not call her. I did not write an angry reply. I drove to the county recorder's office instead and requested a certified copy of my original 1958 deed, along with the full recorded plat for Cedar Hollow Estates. The clerk who pulled both files, a woman named Pearl Anders who had worked there since before I was born, mentioned almost as an afterthought that the Cedar Hollow plat had been notarized by the same retired notary, Harlan Voss, who had notarized my grandfather's deed in 1958, 39 years apart, in the same small office 2 blocks from where we stood. It was a strange, small coincidence, and at the time, I did not think much of it. Document. Do not argue. That is what I told myself, folding both files into a single envelope. Diane did not wait for a response before escalating socially. Within a week, she posted in the Cedar Hollow resident app describing an unnamed neighboring landowner who had ignored HOA correspondence and appeared to be operating unpermitted agricultural activity along the community's edge. She did not use my name, but Cedar Hollow is small enough that everyone who read it knew exactly which fence line she meant. Comments filled in fast. One resident asked if the smell from my cattle pens was a health hazard. Another asked if property values were at risk. A third, a retired schoolteacher named Ruth Ellery, who had actually met me twice at the feed store, wrote that she had always found me perfectly polite and wondered if anyone had simply asked me directly. Nobody had. Diane called an emergency board session 2 days later, informing the 4 other board members that a boundary dispute was underway and that legal action might become necessary to protect community infrastructure. 3 of the 4 board members voted to authorize her to proceed. The 4th, a man named Grant Okafor who worked in commercial real estate, asked a single question in the meeting minutes that nobody answered that night. He asked whether anyone had confirmed the association actually held recorded rights to the road in question. Diane told him the covenants were clear. They were not, and she had never actually read the section she kept citing beyond its number. I found out about the meeting because Ruth Ellery drove out to my ranch that same evening and told me everything, unprompted, standing at my gate with her arms crossed against the evening chill. She said she did not like watching a neighbor get talked about without a chance to answer. I thanked her, wrote down the date and what she told me, and added it to the envelope. 10 days after the board meeting, I woke to the sound of a truck idling on the gravel road before sunrise. A 3-person crew hired by the association had arrived to install a locked access gate roughly 40 feet inside what I knew to be my property line, acting on Diane's instruction that the road fell under community jurisdiction and required controlled entry. I walked down in my work boots, coffee still in hand, and asked the foreman who had authorized the installation. He showed me a work order signed by Diane Reyes, referencing section 6.2 again, the same section that did not apply. I did not argue with him. I asked him to pause for 10 minutes while I retrieved a document from my house, and he agreed, mostly because he looked relieved to have a reason to stop. I brought back the certified 1958 deed and the recorded plat, laid them across the hood of his truck, and pointed to the surveyed boundary line, 43 feet beyond where his crew had already driven the first post. The foreman studied both documents carefully, then called his supervisor. Within 20 minutes, the supervisor arrived personally, reviewed the same paperwork, and halted all work immediately, stating clearly that his company would not install anything on a boundary dispute without independent verification, since doing so exposed his business to liability regardless of what the HOA had instructed. He apologized to me directly and left the single installed post in the ground as evidence, at my request, rather than removing it. That post, sunk 11 inches into ground that was never cedar hollows to touch, became the single most useful piece of physical evidence in the entire dispute. I photographed it from 4 angles, logged the time, and called Officer Hale to file a supplemental report documenting unauthorized construction on private property. Diane, when the supervisor called to inform her the crew had withdrawn, reportedly told him the deed I produced was likely outdated or forged. She said this without having seen it. Document. Do not argue. Even the crew that dug that hole understood the difference once paper entered the conversation. The county hearing happened on a Thursday morning, requested formally by Cedar Hollow's own attorney once the association's insurer refused to authorize further legal action without an independent title review first. Pearl Anders, the county records clerk, testified regarding the plat and deed histories on file. But the detail that actually ended the dispute came from my grandfather's original 1958 deed itself, paragraph 4, a clause I had read 100 times without fully registering its purpose until Pearl pointed it out that morning. The paragraph stated plainly that the described roadway easement, meaning the legal right to keep using that road, was reserved exclusively to the grantee and any future owners, and specifically excluded from the jurisdiction of any homeowners association subsequently organized on adjoining parcels. My grandfather, it turned out, had dealt with a similar dispute in the 1950s with a neighboring rancher and had insisted his attorney write in language that would prevent exactly this situation from happening again, decades before anyone could have known Cedar Hollow Estates would ever exist. Pearl added one more detail that made the hearing room go quiet. The same notary who certified my grandfather's deed in 1958, Harlan Voss, had also notarized the original Cedar Hollow covenants in 1997, 39 years later, and had apparently flagged section 6.2 at the time with a handwritten margin note, preserved in the recorder's copy, stating that the section did not apply to roads already covered by a prior recorded exclusion. Nobody at Cedar Hollow had ever pulled that margin note. Diane had cited a section for months without knowing a warning was written directly beside it. Diane's attorney requested a short recess after Pearl finished reading the note aloud. When the hearing resumed, Cedar Hollow's counsel formally withdrew all claims, rescinded every violation notice issued against me, and confirmed in writing that the association held no jurisdiction over the roadway. Document. Do not argue. I did not say a word during the entire hearing beyond confirming my own name for the record. I did not need to. Word moved through Cedar Hollow within days, the way it always does in a small community once a hearing becomes public record. Ruth Ellery told me later that the same residents who had commented about smells and property values under Diane's post were now asking board members why nobody had checked a single document before authorizing legal threats and construction crews. Grant Okafor circulated a written request for Diane's resignation, citing exposure to personal liability the board's own insurer had specifically warned about. She resigned 11 days after the hearing, before the board could hold a formal vote. The fence post the contractor had left standing in the ground, at my request, became something of a local landmark for a while, and I eventually pulled it myself and gave it to Pearl Anders for the county archive, since she asked half-joking and I did not see the harm in it. The one retaliation incident worth documenting happened 9 days after Diane's resignation, when someone left 3 bags of household trash dumped at the edge of my driveway overnight. I photographed the bags, the tire tracks nearby, and a torn envelope inside one bag addressed to a Cedar Hollow resident 2 streets from Diane's former house. I filed it with Officer Hale as a documented incident, not an accusation, and left it there. Nothing further happened. On HOA True Tales, we do not chase drama. We document it. What would you have done in my position, and why?